Perfect, we're at 10 o'clock, so I will get things started. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. My name is Madeleine. I'm the Executive Director of the Science Fair Foundation BC. We are the organization putting on the 2020 Youth Innovation Showcase. With most of us joining from home today, we'd like to acknowledge that we are grateful to be able to gather virtually today from Indigenous lands. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping notes. We ask that all the participants stay on mute today, just so we can make sure that we can hear all of the panelists really clearly. But please turn on your video. We're not a huge group, and that will help make things more interactive, so we can see everybody and see everyone's reactions. Feel free to also use the reactions at the bottom of the screen. There's sort of a clapping emoji and a thumbs up. So if you like what you're hearing, or you can do it in your video, so sort of react that way. You're welcome to make it as interactive as possible. And we encourage you to ask questions. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end, so please enter your questions in the chat function as we go along, and we will get to as many as we can at the end when we go into our Q&A. So I want to kick things off by thanking our sponsors, RBC Foundation and Ted Rogers Community Grants, for supporting the 2020 Youth Innovation Showcase. I'd also really like to thank Jill Tipping for joining us as the moderator today. Jill is the president and CEO of the BC Tech Association and a passionate advocate in the tech industry. Having spent most of her career working with and for tech companies, she is no stranger to innovation, and we are very thankful to have her as our moderator today. Jill, with that, I will turn things over to you to get started with the panel.
Fantastic. Thanks, Madeleine. Can everyone hear me well? Good. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting you here today, not from the BC Tech Hub, which is where I would normally be along with Madeleine, but in fact from my bedroom. So yes, tiny window into the neatest corner of my bedroom here, and very grateful indeed that you can't see what's on the other side of the camera. Really excited today to moderate this conversation about the FLOW02 team and the Ventilator Challenge. Before we get into that, I just want to take a moment to sort of introduce or let the team introduce themselves. So I think there's 8 team members from Team O2 in total, and we have 5 on the call today. Did I get that right? Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So the 5 we have are Tanya Bennet, Sam Berryman, Tynan Stack, Laura Stankiewicz, and Nico Werschler. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to come to you each in turn in that order, and maybe you just give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what your role was on the team. So let's start off with you, Tanya.
Hi, my name is Tanya Bennet. I'm a PhD student at UBC in the Biomedical Engineering Department. My research is on microscale models of human organs. And for the FLOW02 team, because I am also the teaching assistant and soon to be instructor of the Engineers and Scrubs program at UBC, I played a pretty big role in the clinical liaison. So I basically reached out to local clinicians and experts in the field to get their feedback, as well as assisting with some of the mechanical and electrical design.
Fantastic, thanks, Tanya. Sam, will you go next?
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Sam. I'm a PhD student in mechanical engineering. I mainly work on artificial intelligence for biomedical applications, single cells. I'm currently working towards shifting that towards CAR-T investigation. I'm also a teaching assistant for mechatronic product design. So my role in this project was as sort of the software engineer, as well as doing a lot of the sensor integration.
Thanks, Sam. Tynan, you're up next.
Hi, so my name's Tynan. I'm a recent graduate from UBC and working at Triumph, which is Canada's particle accelerator on campus at UBC. For the project, I was mostly involved with a lot of the mechanical and electrical troubleshooting, as well as a lot of like the outreach with respect to kind of legal things for intellectual property or discussions with groups for, company involvement.
Thanks, Tynan. Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. I'm currently a PhD student in biomedical engineering at UBC. I'm really interested in understanding how our immune system learns which cells in our body are our own healthy cells and which cells are invaders like bacteria or viruses. So my thesis research works to understand how our immune cells are trained during their development and how we can use this knowledge to kind of make these cells in the lab that can be used to kill cancer cells. I kind of have a background in chemical engineering. And so I was working on this project a little bit more on like the mechanical design portion, figuring out how all the components fit together.
Excellent. Thanks, Laura. And finally, Nico.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nico. I'm a PhD student at University of British Columbia in the lines of stem cell bioengineering, getting stem cells to self-organize into human blood vessels so that we can study blood vessel diseases and also transplant blood vessels into patients to fix various vascular conditions. My role in the project was similar to Tanya at the beginning, with clinical contacts and establishing a network to help move our design forward, as well as documentation and kind of those aspects of the project towards the end.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Well, I'm intimidated already. I'm sure everybody else on the phone is too. Maybe just before we get started, I'll just back up a little bit in case anyone who's joined us on the call doesn't know, just give a bit of background to the Code Life Ventilator Challenge. So it was a joint competition organized by McGill, I believe, and Montreal Foundation Hospital with a $200,000 prize to design a new ventilator, because we know ventilators are going to need to be in huge supply as we go through this COVID-19 crisis. And the UBC team, I think, has been listed as one of the top 10, and we're waiting to see who the winners are and who the top 3 will be, and the top 3 designs are going to be released. So really interested to hear how you tackled this challenge. You had a blank sheet of paper, but how did you approach it? So Tanya, can we kick it off with you? Tell us about your team and how you came up with your idea.
Yeah, so you can kind of get a feel. Most of our team consists of current UBC graduate students, plus Tynan, who is a recent alumni. And sort of the idea of actually participating in the Code Life Challenge stemmed from the Engineers and Scrubs program at UBC. The director of the program essentially sent out the information to us. And from there, the members of the current EIS cohort sort of came together and then reached out to other individuals that we were friends with that we knew had the skill sets that would allow us to round our team out. And the actual idea of, or the approach that we took in terms of converting a bi-level device into a ventilator also stemmed from an idea in the Engineers and Scrubs program, where we were actually challenged with the potential idea of making neonatal ventilators for low and middle income countries. So it was a similar design, but different application.
Fantastic. So Sam, would you mind diving a little bit more into the design process and tell us about the steps that you took?
Yeah, so looking back, I'd say we were forced into a bit of an iterative design process consisting of a number of really quick sprints. So at any point in time, we were really only thinking about, say, 3 or 4 days in advance and what needed to be done to get to that next step or that next prototype. What was really important, though, was how our prototype was developing. You have to start with just that basic functionality. You get a sensor connected to an Arduino, you get it reading something, while over to the side, you've got a different component or some other software getting tested, and you don't even think about connecting the two. You know, after that, then you try to get these components working together in some monstrosity. And I'm not talking about making a good prototype. I'm talking about making the thing you don't want to show anybody because it's covered in duct tape, it's made of cardboard, and there's loose wires all over the place. You know, only after you have this thing that actually resembles somewhat of a device can you start thinking about making something that looks good. And at every step along this way, you need to be prepared to throw out everything you have and restart to make it to that next stage.
Thank you, Sam. I got to say, I've worked with engineers for 25 years, and this is exactly the approach. It always involves something extremely ugly and many iterative processes. And I was always the person who was not allowed to throw away the really ugly thing because it had the origination of the idea. I do just want to draw the attention of everybody on the call to the chat function. So don't hesitate to ask any questions as they occur to you, as you're hearing from our panelists, and we'll come to those at the end of the call. But if something sparks your interest as we're going through, then just don't hesitate to type it into chat. Okay, Nico, let's go over to you and tell us about how you leveraged the connections that you had. You were telling us that was one of the things. And what are some connections that youth on this call might not realize that they have?
Yeah, so I guess with our project and any project, it's really important to establish a network of people to help move your idea forward. And for us, that kind of started off with thinking of those we know working in relevant fields and those that we thought would be applicable to help move our idea forward. So even if it was a shot in the dark, if we were remotely connected to, say, like a family member or a family friend's cousin's pet owner, that remotely connected, we would reach out to them via email or phone. And another important thing we would include in our reach out was that if the person that we were contacting felt that they weren't fit for the task, we would ask them to politely forward our outreach to someone that they might know would be able to fill that position for us. So not only are we leveraging our own networks, but also those of others and kind of expanding our scope of impact that way. And then I recall, like, during some of my own like youth innovations where I had like a pop can or a panel like solar air heating unit that I designed, I felt that I didn't really have the connections that I needed back then to get my ideas out there. But retrospectively, I did throughout my daily activities, for example, soccer team or band or like dance classes. All these places shouldn't only be seen as like activities, but maybe also ways in which you can leverage these connections. Say your friend's parents, for example, could link you with a number of different people that could be interested in exploring your fantastic ideas. So I think that's kind of how we went about it initially. And those are some unexpected connections that you could have in your own life.
That's fantastic. You know, just to jump onto your point there, because I get a lot of people getting in touch with me just to see if I can maybe help them with something. Always be as specific as you can possibly be with your ask.
Oh, certainly.
Right? Then if I can help you, I'll help you. But if I can't, I might immediately think of 2 people that I could connect you to that might be able to help you.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Now, did you find any grants or resources that you should be aware of that they might not be aware of?
Yeah, so during the COVID-19 crisis, there have been made available a number of different funding opportunities for COVID-related research and startup projects. A number of these range in funding amounts from, say, like $5,000, $3,000 all the way up into the millions. And of course, the higher number, the more competitive the application. We shot in 2 applications for about $200,000 of funding, none of which came back successful. One of them was a Genome BC grant opportunity. UBC, almost nearly half the profs at UBC applied for that, and no one came home successful with that. So we're not too bummed out about that one. And another one was a FAST grant opportunity from an international emergent ventures program, and we didn't come back there either positively. But UBC opened up some internal funding, kind of, we think, directed towards our project because they wanted to help out. And we managed to secure about $20,000 through UBC to do that, as well as the Engineers and Scrubs program opened up a couple $1,000s for us to work on this project as well. But for youth specifically, there are a number of funding opportunities that are open, but the drawback to this is the fact that they're difficult to come across and they take time to apply for. In my opinion, I think that the most difficult process in the grant writing is finding these grant opportunities that you feel that you are well suited for and your project is well suited for a strong application. I think the best approach would be like taking a pen and paper and a couple hours to just really jot down which applications and funding initiatives you're eligible for. And once you get this idea of like a grant theme that you can kind of work with and you get a couple applications in, you'll soon find yourself sending off a number of different funding applications within a day or so. And specific ones I could think of would be, I guess, the EAF fund, which is the Enabling Accessibility Fund. It's hosted at the federal level, so the Government of Canada, and it's a well-established funding opportunity. It covers nearly all project fields, and it looks for keen, dynamic youth, just as yourselves and ourselves, who want to demonstrate leadership and more commitment to communities through volunteering of their time to build a more accessible Canada. And additionally, signing up your innovations for regional science fairs and pitch competitions, such as the Youth Innovation Showcase, is a great way not only to gain presentation exposure, but also funding exposure from relevant parties.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Tynan, let's turn to you. Tell us how you worked as a team.
So especially right now, working as a team at the best of times can be a challenge. Whether you're getting your opinions across to everyone in the group, or some people aren't getting heard properly. Now it's much harder, but also easier, because now you're not all in the same room when you're working together on a project. You're all on a call, and if one person tries to talk over someone else, no one gets heard. It also brings up other challenges of technical glitches of dropping off of calls and potentially just having missing parts of the conversation. And it really kind of makes everyone in the team more aware of what they're saying, who's there to listen, who's in a given call, even because sometimes not everyone has to be in a call, or some discussions are better had in smaller groups amongst experts within your group. And it kind of helped us realize what each of us were best at within our group, and kind of push what we were doing towards what we were good at, so we could do it efficiently and not waste other people's time with meetings we had and things like that.
That's really helpful. I've found that these Zoom calls are way more democratic and actually more time efficient than meetings beforehand. So I'm planning on keeping Zoom in my portfolio. Tanya, let's come to you. Now, to create the ventilator, you had to move super fast. So just remind us how fast you had to move, and then tell us, how did you innovate on that timeline?
Yeah, so I think when we first actually kind of all assembled and was going, for that first initial deadline, we were working on 12 days, which was a very fast timeline. But in total, since we started, it's been just over a month that we've sort of gone from ideation to functional prototype, or almost manufacturable prototype. And I think, just as sort of cheesy as it sounds, the innovation on such a tight timeline came down to like motivation, organization, delegation, trust, and a ton of trial and error. You kind of have to throw the idea of being wrong out the window and just do something. And if it doesn't work, figure out another way. The other thing that we sort of realized very early on was that for the challenge itself, there was a lot of deliverables. So it wasn't just, make something and send it in and we'll test it out. It was make something and then also have all of the accompanying documentation. So all of the plans and all of the steps that are needed, not only to make the prototype, but to make sure that if you are going the full process, actually getting it ready for regulatory approval. And so delegation and then trusting each other was really important there, because you needed to trust that somebody was going to actually complete the task by a deadline, but also complete it to the highest quality that they're capable of doing. And so I think that combination of those things, and always being motivated, even though motivation does ebb and flow, all of us knew exactly what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to help out. So that pushed us through all of those, 22-hour days that we were constantly on the go.
Wow, it sounds like you built a really strong team. Well done. Laura, let's come to you and tell us about the ways in which the COVID-19 situation itself spurred innovation. So it spurred innovation, but did it give you challenges as well? Tell us a bit about the unique circumstances you were innovating in.
For sure. It's a great question. I think that this entire last 2 months or 3 months has been a time like none other, where everyone in the world, or pretty much everyone in the world, is in the same boat, where we're all working from home and we all kind of feel a little bit helpless that we don't know how to help in the situation. I'm not a nurse or a doctor, and I think I have different skills. So I think it was a really unique opportunity where we have a common challenge or problem that we want to solve, and that we all actually have some time to sit down and reflect about what kind of skills you have and where those might actually be able to be applied to look for new solutions. And that applies to everyone, like not just myself and my team, but CEOs of companies who are now working from home, and they have some time to reflect about what this might provide as an opportunity to spend some time and guide people. And that was really helpful for us. Although we had challenges of not being able to work together to prototype, we also were kind of figuring out how to use Zoom and Skype to our advantage. And one of the advantages of that was that all of these CEOs are also at home and they have a little bit more time than they usually do when they're at their companies working with people. So it was kind of an easier time to set up meetings. But I really think that just the collective challenges that we're all faced with, and then having some time to, even though working from home is not as interesting, you do have more time to reflect about what you're good at and where you might be able to help.
That's really interesting. I had a CEO say to me the other day, everybody answers their phone now. It's really weird. And nobody says, I'm sorry, I'm in Germany at a conference, can't talk. So there's upsides too. Okay, and but tell us about some of the biggest roadblocks you faced, Laura. What were the moments where you really, questioned whether you could overcome it?
For sure. I think that back to what Tanya was talking about, we had a really tight timeline, and like more than that, global supply chains are stretched at the moment. We've been hearing a lot about that, and that was a really relevant problem for us. So we had 12 days to prototype. The first 3 were kind of making our team, and then there was at least like 5 days where you're just buying things and waiting for them to come in the mail. And so it was definitely a challenge trying to figure out or foresee all of the problems that we're going to have when you then get those components and you have 2 days to put them together. So trying to problem solve before problems actually happen was definitely a new thing for a lot of us. And kind of along those lines, when you're trying to prototype at a distance over Skype, it's a lot slower or a lot harder to try and communicate what the issue actually is if you're troubleshooting. So trying to be really specific with your language or using your phones to show people what the issue is. Definitely not being able to work together in the same room was a challenge, but also just forced us to learn a lot about different technologies that we can use to communicate over the internet.
Fantastic. Okay, well now we're all getting used to this whole Zoom thing. We're going to up the degree of difficulty. Okay, next question's coming to 2 of our O2 teammates. Let's see if they can coordinate, demonstrate that fabulous teamwork. So Sam and Tynan, your challenge, should you be willing to accept it, we'd love to hear you both on this. Was being part of a competition helpful?
So if I can go first, that's okay with you, Tynan. So the competition really drove us to get this project done fast by giving us these really short 1 to 2 week deadlines. And sometimes these were new deadlines we didn't actually know about. They kind of came up or got invented as the project went along. And this came because this was such a fast challenge. They were also learning on their end. But working with these and just trying to make these deadlines was sort of an insane topic for us. And I'm talking about going to bed at 5 a.m. and getting a call at 8 a.m. because there's an electrical emergency that has to get fixed now. And this prototype's not getting sent in unless it does. So really for us, this was, 24 hours in, and sleep, school, and honestly eating were just a side thought. And I cannot say that that is a sustainable practice.
Yeah, and I'll say from my point of view, being a part of a competition has its benefits and has its drawbacks. Things that we're kind of dealing with now are potentially some of the drawbacks of things where you don't necessarily think about potential repercussions of joining a competition with respect to things you've made. So generally a lot of them have, certain clauses where as being a part of the competition, you have some, exchange of information between you and them. And understanding what that means is kind of hard to do, especially when you're on a super tight timeline. That being said, the competition gave us a really tight timeline. This entire situation, time matters. Like having a result 2 weeks later makes a big difference on what kind of impact it could have. So at least for this, and in general, I think competitions are good to enter into because it gives you your own internal, it gives you an external timeline instead of just your own internal ones. But there are also potential drawbacks that are worth, reading into and trying to learn as much about as you can ahead of time before you agree to doing a competition.
That's fascinating. There's a quote, I think it's from Voltaire, that's the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I remember you were talking too about getting rid of that fear of failure. You just have to sort of barf up your ideas. Sorry, that's a technical term that we use. But and let go of the fear of being wrong, right? The fear of being seen to ask a stupid question or make a stupid proposal, and that's one of the biggest gifts that a tight timeline can give you. Because you're just forced to get over that fear and blurt it out, and from that comes amazing innovation. Nico, let's come to you now. What advice would you give to the young innovators who've joined this call about how they could get their ideas out there?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think getting your ideas out there is a very important aspect of moving any innovation forward. But it's good to start with, I would say, defining on what out there really means in terms of this scenario. Like once you define what's out there, you have in a way kind of defined your end user or the end purpose of your application. And this will help shape your design throughout its process and the product that you envision it to be, but also the product that the people you were designing it for want it to be. And that will help its basically application and impact once it gets out there. So once all that's done and you're proud and happy kind of with your work, you could register for like local science fair initiatives and showcases like the Youth Innovation Showcase, for example, or the BC Regional Science Fair. And there's a number of great exposure events, even ones that are even taking place during these times. There's the BC Yukon, it's a virtual science fair going on. You can check that out online on the BC Science Fair Foundation site. There's also like publication opportunities available for you. Such as the Canadian Science Fair Journal. It's Canada's largest youth innovation publication. I've been working as an editor for them for the last 4 years, and we've really kind of brought to the front a platform where youth scientists can publish their research, publish their projects, as they have great ideas out there that need to be published and have exposure. For example, there was a grade 12 student I worked with last year that designed a way for blind persons to navigate the external world using vibration motors. And he's in grade 12 and walked away with $75,000 of awards, as well as something just for a simple innovation that he did come up with, and he did work on the project wholly himself. And it was a very exciting opportunity. So you can, of course, reach out to me after. I'll drop my email in the chat if you're willing to explore these opportunities, and I can provide separate feedback that way as well. But there's definitely opportunities out there for you and all of us.
Great. Laura, this is a question that really intrigues me. So you guys are a technical team solving a technical challenge, and then you got a lot of media attention for your innovation, right? Everybody wants to celebrate your success. How did you handle all of those interviews? That's a totally different pressure. What was that experience like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people on our team, this is something that I'd never done before and didn't have any personal experience with. And it was a huge learning experience in itself. I kind of was uncomfortable in the beginning just because didn't have any experience and like not usually someone who would speak on camera, but I kind of came to the realization that what we were doing was super cool. And like along those lines, there's so much science that is super cool that people just don't hear about because they watch the news or they read Forbes articles and they don't read the academic journals that I read. And so if you want people to know about all of these cool projects that are going on and to really like to be able to capitalize on your own work, but also just like get the recognition from the community that there are things going on that provide hope or that like people are working on, that is kind of a necessary thing to just kind of overcome that initial reservations and just try and showcase your work and show people that there are initiatives going on that they can also try and do the same things. So yeah, I think that having that realization for myself was just a motivator to get over that initial hump of being shy and just try and be excited about what we've created and make other people excited about science and all of those things as well.
Yeah, I really struggled with that myself. And then someone said to me, someone very wise said to me, it's not about you, it's about your work. Yeah. And then that made it a lot easier.
I had the same thing. I had someone say that to me in the fall, where if it's not about you trying to say, this is what I've done, it's for everyone else who's like, wow, I can do that too. And unless they see that first example, then you just never have that thought in the first place. So
exactly. Tynan, okay, tell us what's next for the team.
So at the moment, we have a device that more or less works. We still have, future testing to do before it's ready to get used for anything. And we have a number of questions we still have to answer of, how do we try to get this thing certified to be a medical device? Or do we? Who are we going to try to talk to manufacture it? Or do we want to try to work with a bigger company to develop it further beyond that? Or do we want to try to just, write a paper on our device and, make it public? We have a lot of open questions that we still have to answer, and we're kind of trying to work our way down that road. Right now, kind of our next biggest steps are something that generally people, in our shoes don't really think about, which is intellectual property, or, essentially what your invention is. And if it's something that you can actually, like necessarily say is yours or claim is yours legally. And that's kind of the path we're going down right now. And we're trying to, figure out what we still have with respect to that. And then in the near future beyond that, it's trying to get a market for this and trying to get it out there to help people, whether that's part of the COVID crisis or not. It may have potential applications outside of that. And something we've learned is it's very, very useful to try to get expert opinions about things, because they have a very different approach to things than you do. And having other people give opinions on your devices or your inventions can really help guide you in where you're going to end up.
That's fantastic. So I'll just make a quick offer, and then I have one final question for the team. So don't be surprised before I hand it back to Madeleine for Q&A from. But so my offer is, if I can be of any help whatsoever, just let me know. Remember, be really specific in your asks, but I've got a lot of contacts in industry, manufacturers, advisors, mentors. So you decide what you need, but if you need anything, don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll connect you to people. So I'd like to go to each of the panelists in turn, and I'll do it in the same order I introduced you in. But would you mind sharing with the group one of two things? So what did you learn, or what are you proudest of? Whatever you feel more comfortable answering. So Tanya, let's start with you.
I'll answer what did I learn, since I think all of these opportunities is just a learning opportunity. The thing that I learned the most, even though I do have extensive experience in projects related to medical device development, I didn't realize how much additional things come into play after the prototyping is done. So I've learned through, case studies before that sometimes what happens is people will create something that's really cool and, they think is amazing, but they haven't gotten the input from the clinicians or the experts in the field. And sometimes it just doesn't end up going anywhere. And one of my favorite stories is actually one from Vancouver General Hospital, where there was a group of individuals who created this amazing surgical robot that helped with surgery. And it was brilliant, but it was so expensive. And when they came back and said, what does this do and what do we need it to do? They realized that the surgical robot, which cost over $1 million, was doing essentially the same job as a resident who was holding a leg up while surgery was happening. And so they realized that it could be quickly changed into, articulated PVC piping that just holds a foot in place while you're doing surgery. And this project really gave me even more insight into how crucial it is to not only know what the clinical need is, but ensure that you're continuously validating, because the clinical need changes every day. And so that's something that I really learned.
Boy, that is wise words, especially from my career in industry. The needs of the customer and the needs of the market are changing all the time, and you have to keep going back and checking in. So Sam, tell us, what did you learn, or what are you proudest of?
I'll start with the proud part. I mean, I'm just proud that we were able to, do something in this during all of this, because before even starting on this project, I was just always really anxious about everything going on with the pandemic. I don't think anybody's used to this yet. as far as what I learned a mountain of things, and there's the technical and the non-technical. So I could go into detail for a couple hours talking about all the technical stuff I learned with different embedded systems and integrating different sensors and getting those things working together. But we're not going to talk about that. On the other non-technical side of things, it's that you can't be afraid to go and talk to people. And if you're going to go and reach out, people are going to tell you no. And people are going to tell you no again. And there's certain people you can keep pushing until they say yes. And there's other people, you need to move on. But you should never take negative feedback from someone to heart. Take it as a constructive criticism, or somebody that just doesn't want to work with you.
Yeah, that happens too. Tynan, what are you proudest of, or what did you learn?
I would probably say that I was proudest / most surprised by how much I could learn in a month. I spent, 5 years in an undergraduate engineering degree. I spent 2 years working in industry, and, I essentially learned how a ventilator works in a week, and more or less how to try to build one from the ground up. And that's just astonishing that, when you're in a situation where you're really pushed for time, you can learn a lot really, really quickly. And by no means am I claiming that I did that on my own. We did that as a group. All of us have our own experiences, and we had a lot of contacts that helped us a ton throughout this. We had a ton of clinicians, doctors, business people all across the board who are out there trying to help, because right now, at least, everyone's trying to figure out, what can I do to help? We're in this really weird situation where everyone's a little bit stuck and everyone wants to do something, but doesn't necessarily know how or what to do to help. So for me, it was a really great learning experience with respect to technical knowledge and, interacting with businesses and groups who, a month ago, I would not think that we would be talking to 80% of the groups we're talking to now. And I would expect them to, for lack of a better description, laugh us off. But if you come to someone with something that's good, more often than not, they'll give you an ear. And sometimes it might surprise you that they will.
Definitely need to ask. Laura, let's come to you. So what are you proudest of, or what did you learn?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go along with what Tynan's saying there for what we learned. I know for myself, kind of similar. I know Adam joined this call, who's also a member on our team, but he hasn't turned on his video yet. I learned a lot about how to get things done on a really short timeline. And that's not necessarily just technical things. Again, don't really want to talk about that too much, but reaching out to people and knowing that they can call on their network and realizing how big your second person away network was kind of astonishing to me. You can reach out to my prof, and then he connects you to other people, and same with everyone else. And the next thing we know, we have too many people than we can keep up with. And then similarly to that, Adam has been really amazing. Just being able to get things done. He can talk to anybody and they will respond to him, or he will kind of just bug them until they do. And I learned a lot about finding a balance between trying to push people to give you an answer and to, just give you the time of day of listening to what you might have to say to them. And then knowing when you probably should have a different contact that you should be looking for. And then the other thing that I again, back to the last question that you asked me, you can get really far by having some media attention and by showcasing your device and being we are here. We are after our initial thing from UBC, we got so much more support and kind of just some validation from people when we were reaching out that we could say that we were part of this contest or we'd gotten this far. And although it didn't really mean anything to us because our device was the same one day to the next, it's amazing how helpful it is to make contacts and to just continue pushing your device forward if you have some media attention and you're not afraid to try and get out there and show people what you're doing.
That's great. Your future marketing colleagues are going to be so happy to be working with you now. Nico, you get the last word. What are you proudest of, or what did you learn?
I think I can touch on both of those. I am proud of the team and all that they've put together into this project. It's been a very exciting last few weeks, and there's nothing more invigorating than seeing something come together in this kind of timeline. And it just makes you energized and excited, especially during a kind of a disquieting time like this. It's nice to know that there's people out there that want to make a difference, and you can see it materialize here. What did I learn? I think more from my background in research, and when you're in a lab and set up with your own cell work and you kind of have all the things you need there, it's kind of all about you ordering your stuff, you doing your experiments, and you writing about your results. But then you see here in this crisis and the efficacy of collaboration and how we really needed it to move forward this project. It wouldn't have been possible without the network and the people that came together to make it happen. As one person definitely could not have drafted a couple hundred pages of documentation that we needed or assembled a number of these prototypes. Collaboration is often seen as something that's maybe not as efficient as it could be in science, but I think this is a prime example of how it can function to really help your project along. And I think that's something I've learned in addition to the other things that people mentioned. We've all learned a lot.
Fantastic. Well, that concludes sort of my moderated section, but not the call at all. So I'm going to hand back to Madeleine, who's going to moderate questions from the chat or from anyone who wants to join us. So either type your question into chat or don't hesitate to just sort of put your hand up in the normal way and we can come to you for a verbal question. Back to you, Madeleine.
Thank you so much, Jill. That's been fantastic. We do have one really great question in the chat. Emily, do you want to read it out or do you want me to do it from the chat? Perfect.
Yeah, sure. I noticed after I typed it that I said deadlines twice. But yeah, with deadlines and making as many connections as possible, I know things tend to get overwhelming. That's kind of what I'm finding right now. I'm having like all these awesome people that I'm reaching out to, people that are reaching out to me, and it's just like, so yeah, do you have any organizational techniques that help you keep calm and keep moving you forwards?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that. It's definitely very, very easy to get overwhelmed when people are responding and being so helpful. One of the things that I found very helpful when I was reaching out to clinicians and reaching out to contacts was to really sit down and try to think, okay, what is it that I'm trying to get out of this form of communication? And I think the group as a whole started to take that approach where it was, all right, let's actually identify if we're going to present to this group or if we're going to talk to this individual, what is it that we're going to get out of it? And that allowed us to kind of prioritize who we were reaching out to. I typically do a internal sort of deadline of if somebody emails me or calls me, I will respond within 24 hours. And to me, responding sometimes is just saying, thank you so much for reaching out. I'll get back to you in terms of specific questions or anything like that, but it's just acknowledging the correspondence while you're trying to work through essentially how to do a priority matrix or figure out, you know, what's the best and most efficient people to be talking to at that current point in time.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's great advice, Tanya. The other thing that's kind of like on a different topic, but I find really useful is like, if you have these deadlines in your mind and you can see them, sometimes it's useful to be able to recognize when you're getting overwhelmed and know that you'll be so much more productive in 2 hours from now if you go for a 30-minute run or you go and have a coffee with a friend. And knowing that sometimes taking a step back and taking a break makes you more productive and helps you focus in the long run. So finding a balance is always my advice.
I think to add to that as well, just being able to, in your mind, just like Laura mentioned, kind of categorize what you want to do. And once you see yourself and that plan you have set in front of you, going and tackling those things one at a time, instead of worrying about what's to come after the first thing you've completed, is a better way to kind of keep that sanity that's needed to move forward as well.
I think everybody kind of has their own technique when it comes to this. I think going through university, you kind of get to learn how to go through those high stress situations. But for me personally, it's about waking up in the morning and just thinking, you know, what can I actually do today? What can I do that I'm not waiting on other people? And when you get into those situations where you're feeling overwhelmed, where you're looking at your keyboard or your computer and you're just saying, I don't know what to do here, or, you know, this is too much, just go walk into a different room, pour yourself a cup of tea, and take some time. Like Laura said, go for a run, get your head out of that space and come back to it, because it'll be there when you come back.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I'm noticing that lately too, with taking a break is like really important, because I did that too in like university. I'd be like, no, I have to study for 2 hours right now. And it'd be like 2 hours of wasting my time. But now I'm finding I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to go for a walk and then it'll be better. So yeah, thank you so much. That answered my question.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, because I'm a very task-oriented person, so I will create task lists and everything like that to basically have the ability to check it off. But I was told by my PI that putting down 5 tasks and completing them by the end of the day is so much more beneficial than writing down 30 tasks that you'll never be able to complete in a day. So really just like identifying what are those things and being satisfied that you've completed those tasks and not try to overwhelm yourself with everything that has to get done in a timeline.
Cool. Yeah, and I like that idea too of categorizing for prioritizing. That's really helpful too. Thank you.
Perfect. Those are great answers. Compartmentalizing is a huge part. Yeah, just doing what you have to right now and then thinking about the next thing next, not to get overwhelmed. We have another great question from Christina. Christina, do you want to ask it yourself, or would you like me to read it out?
I can read it.
Perfect.
Are there ever times when you might look at a design when innovating and be unsure about whether or not it would work out? And if this happens, are there any tricks when designing that might help fix things that do not seem right? Also, to what extent do you think that the exploration of space would help our understanding of different sciences in our everyday lives?
I think that's a great question. There's a lot of different answers you can give to that, but I'd start out with tackling the first half of it, and that's end user involvement in your device or your system that you're looking to design. You really have to take into account who you're building this for and what they want it for and why they even need it in the first place. And doing this, a neat trick that you can do is just reaching out to these communities that you're working towards, and you can do you can design thorough survey analysis, or you can do in-person interviews and talk to kind of all relevant parties that will be involved in each stage of your innovation. And this will help kind of guide you towards making a system that's optimized for the population that you're building it for. That's what I would say for the first half. As to the second half, I'll need a little more time to think about the space exploration question, but maybe we'll get back to you on that. But I don't know, other team members could probably answer more on the first half.
I'll give a little bit of feedback to that. So for my background, I'm working at Triumph, which is a particle accelerator based at UBC, but I'm actually working on it, building an upgrade for one of the detectors at the Large Hadron Collider. So not necessarily space, but similar to that. And I think space exploration itself is probably going to teach us a lot, but I think what it will cause is more technological advancement to get us there. And I think a lot more is probably going to come out of the technological advancement of being like, hey, can we, for example, get a person to Mars and back? There's a huge number of technical challenges associated with that, way beyond the scope of just getting to Mars, getting a sample and coming back. And I think that's probably going to be where a lot of the benefits to, general society come from. I mean, a lot of early stage things that were, on the very leading edge of science are now commonplace, like radionucleotides for cancer treatment, or even MRIs or PET scans that are these things, 30 years ago didn't exist, or if they did exist, they were right on the cutting edge and weren't things that were commercially available. But now we've realized that there's good uses for them in other locations. I hope that kind of answers your question.
I might add to that as well. One of the things that I've learned over my years is that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from failure. So they come from when you're working on something and that's the application you have in mind. Sometimes the things that are what we would consider the scraps or the throwaways, those are actually things that have the most value in society. And it's identifying that, like, it's not just the end goal, but it's the entire process. It's all the things that you're learning. It's all the things that you're making throughout. Because I mean, like, even when, creating the light bulb, he basically was like, yeah, I found out 1,000 ways how not to make a light bulb before he made the first light bulb. And so I think it's just identifying that, like, you're going to fail, and failure is not an end. It's a start of a new beginning. And I think to your sort of, the first part of your question is that, you're always going to be unsure as to whether or not what you're making is the right thing to do or the right approach or anything like that. And I agree with Nico that end users and knowing, who potentially is going to use it and stuff is really, really beneficial, but also just any second set of eyes or like anybody else looking at it. We, a lot of times, even if you're writing like a document, if you write that and you spend 6 hours on it, there's a reason that we have spell check, because you're going to miss those small mistakes. And so you can think about it as somebody else looking at your innovation is that spell check. It's someone just to catch those small things that even if you looked at in supreme detail, you're never going to actually pick up on.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the design question as well. If, like Tanya said, if you're designing something and you think the entire time, this is going to work, and you're not scared at any point in time that it's going to fail, you deserve a much larger salary than whatever you're getting, because you should be scared the entire time it's not going to work. But honestly, when you're designing something, and I always, kind of go towards these things that I know about, which is, say, integrating a sensor or working with some sort of embedded system. And you really have to do the low-end test that's going to be as quickly as possible. So you want to isolate the thing that you're trying to add into your system, all of the little components, and test them out and make sure they work. It's really, really, like, people really like to think, I'm going to design this thing, I have this idea, and it's going to work because I know it's going to work, so I'm going to design the final product first. And, in 2 weeks' time, it's going to look great and it's going to be really good. And it's the learning experience that you don't see yourself needing to go through, because you don't know, what you don't know. So that's my advice.
All really great answers. Thank you. Laura, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I just had one more thing to add, just because I know that when we're designing things, we're really invested in whatever we're making. And sometimes it's hard to just know when to stop on a certain component and be like, this is not working. I'm going to scrap it and just start from the beginning. And sometimes that's when you have the best ideas. And I think, again, that's what Tanya and Tynan and Sam were all touching on. But like, we went through that with one of our valves we were designing. We'd all put in so much effort and time and like thought into it. And it's hard to just let it go and just never think about it again. But that is okay. And a really normal thing that once you start kind of getting used to just moving on from certain components that aren't working, it gets easier. So not being too attached to individual components and just trying to think a little bit bigger about what you need. That's all I have to
I also, if we're okay to move forward for the next question, I see in the chat Keanu and Braxton Chan. Interestingly, actually, Keanu, I worked with him with the Canadian Science Fair Journal. He's developed a system for blood clotting for patients, and it's a very cool project. Good job, Keanu. Nice to see you here today. So he asked, what's the most beneficial way to connect with others for a project? For instance, to receive a grant or a partner with a company or business. I think, as we've mentioned a couple times before, just kind of reaching out to people and not fearing the failure or fearing a rejection from someone, and kind of keep pushing the connection until they say no. That's when you actually know it's a no. And even if you do get a no from someone, it's you just being left off in the same situation that you were in before you even had reached out to them. And in all that, you can just be like, well, that opinion doesn't really matter to me too much. I'm going to try to reach out to someone who wants to involve me and my idea, or maybe help shape my idea. If it's the wrong idea initially, they can help shape it towards something that's impactful. For grants and partners, companies, businesses, you want to write concise documents, put your project goals and initiatives kind of up there at the top, and then give your background after. Usually the people that are going to be reading your applications are people that don't have all the time of day to read this huge background on yourself. They want to know why you want their money and what you're going to do with it. And especially if you do get these funding opportunities, it's very important to let them know what you've done with that funding, as well as thank them for it, so that in the future they flagged you and they see, hey, these people have developed a ventilator with the money we gave to them. Now we see that it's doing X, Y, Z. In the future, if they come to us with a funding idea or project, we know that they're going to turn around this money into something useful. So definitely acknowledge your funding sources once you secure them as well.
I think also a really beneficial way for connecting with others on projects and stuff like that is, no matter, where your life takes you and everything like that, there's always people that will come back, and there's always people that like you learn throughout your life who has those skill sets and who has, who brings value to a project that you're working on. For instance, Tynan and Sam and we knew each other in our undergraduate degree. And that's kind of how, they got brought onto the project, was I knew both of them and both of their skill sets. And I was like, oh, we need this kind of expertise. Let me ask, these guys that I knew from undergrad. And they, jumped on the opportunity because they were looking for something. And so I think don't overestimate the network that you already have established, friends, family, anybody, if you have an idea, just sort of ask people if they would be interested in getting involved. And then I think the thing with, grants and finding partners and stuff like that, we've really alluded to it this entire conversation, is the idea of like, you have to be okay with failure. Like, I mean, I'm a graduate student, I have to write grants and stuff like that. And you have to prepare yourself that, if you're putting a grant together for, $200,000, there's a lot of people that are competing for that. And there's a likelihood that you're not going to get that money. So, it's every single time you write a grant or you try to find a partner, you learn from that experience. And so don't be afraid to fail, just try and try to, there's going to be money for something at some point. So just keep trying and keep trying.
Really great feedback. Another thing I would add is, don't be afraid of that you're asking too much. Just be really clear with what you're asking for. Because I find sometimes people they don't want to ask too much because they don't want to be rude. But like Jill said, the more specific, the better, because she needs to know what you want and how she can help you. She really wants to, but she needs to know how to. So make sure what you're asking for is really clear. And people, I find, are most of the time very helpful, but there are some people who won't be a good fit, but just keep going. There's always somebody who will be a great fit. Amy also has a great question. So Amy, would you like to ask it yourself? If you can unmute, or give you a couple seconds, otherwise I can read it out. Okay, I'll go for it. Where do you find inspiration? Do you develop ideas from bouncing topics off teammates? Do you draw from previous experience? How do you gauge the need of the market? What sources do you look to?
I'll speak to that a little bit, unless Laura, you'd like to go first.
I'll go for it.
Okay. For finding inspiration, it really depends on what you're doing. So sometimes you're working on your own, so you don't necessarily have teammates to bounce ideas off of. I know some people I've interacted with in the past for, either some of their capstones for university or things like that. They've found ideas that are, for lack of a better term, almost out of the blue. Something that they see is like, that can be done better. So I'm going to try to do it better. But yeah, if you have teammates, generally bouncing ideas off of your teammates is extremely helpful, because different people think about different problems different ways. Definitely draw from previous experience if you have it. If not, ask for help. A lot of people are willing to help in a lot of situations. For the market, that can be a challenge, because what market are you looking for as well? So that's a lot of, asking people in what market you're looking at, or where you think it might be used, because in the end, it may not get used where you think it will. And then sources, Government websites for things like that are typically good, or universities also have a lot of resources for things like that as well. Sorry, I see we're running out of time, so I was trying to answer the question, but be somewhat brief.
Does anyone have any quick last words to add before we close out?
I was just going to say, I think I took that question a little bit more on the personal side rather than technical. I live with one of the people on our team, Georgia, who's not here. And I would say just both with working from her and with working with all of my teammates, I find inspiration by just how motivated all of these super cool people that I have, honestly, for most of them, just met within the last month is. People who just want to work on a project because they're super passionate about it and just want to think about the same thing that you're thinking about and work on it, again, really late at night or really early in the morning. That is super inspiring for me to just keep motivated and wanting to come back to it every day when sometimes they're just really long days. So I would always just suggest, surrounding yourself with the type of people who make you want to go and continue working on the things that you know that you should be working on, but sometimes you don't want to because you'd rather go for a run.
I would also say that being inspired through kind of your life experience, your daily experiences, like whether you're walking out in nature and looking at how different like systems grow, or just thinking about how you can apply maybe some of your like own innovations to some product that might be needed out there. Say you're in a shopping center and you realize like a sticker could be put a different way on a product or in a more efficacious place. So, they say that in order to be a successful entrepreneur, you should be putting forward about 20 thorough ideas every day. And just kind of bouncing these around your head is not only a great pastime and makes you really jot your creativity without a Lego set, but it also helps you kind of push the boundaries of your own kind of innovation scope. And it's really exciting and fun. So just inspire yourself. And if you're following a project you're inspired on, it's going to be a lot easier to accomplish and make impactful.
Thank you all so much. And I'll just close things off because we are a couple minutes over. A huge thank you to Jill and everyone from FLOW02 for joining today. This was absolutely fantastic. And to all of the participants today, great questions as always. I know many of you have joined many of our events so far. We are hosting events, workshops, virtual tours from now until the end of June and possibly beyond. So keep checking the website youthinnovation.ca for more details. Our next session is coming up on May 19th, and it will be diving into how VR and AR are changing industries and preparing us for the era of spatial computing. And I know many of you have already submitted innovations to the Youth Innovation Showcase, but if you haven't and you live in BC or the Yukon and are between the ages of 12 and 24, please submit an idea. The deadline's been extended to May 14th. Any innovative idea that you have, you can submit it. Just by submitting a short video pitch, you can win $500. If you are selected as one of the winners of each age category, you'll receive $5,000. So definitely worth some time. You can check out more information on our website, youthinnovation.ca. And thank you all again. This was wonderful. Thank you. Thanks
for having us.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.